I don't envy the clergy in Buffalo and in Texas these days, because people often turn to religious communities. And depending on the nature of the tragedy or the proximity of the tragedy to those who seek comfort, people enter sanctuaries of religious institutions with a range of emotions. They enter sometimes with anger at the perpetrators or at the system that's believed to have failed the victims, or perhaps even to God if they believe God has failed to protect the suffering. And there's sorrow carried by the ones who are victims themselves, or perhaps from an association with those who have been victimized. And there's loss, personal, painful loss, but also empathic loss. Parents feel losses borne by other parents. Lovers feel the loss of partners. Community members feel the pain of lives shattered. And there's despair with a world. How can this be the world that we feel like we work so hard to create, and yet we seem to go backwards? And what can we do so it doesn't happen again? It's wrought of despair. And there's cynicism, lots of cynicism. Nothing helps. This is just the way it is. We have to live with it. And so they walk into our sanctuaries, they walk into our offices, they send us emails, they call us, and there are a whole range of complex emotions that it falls on us to provide some meaning, some support, and some love and compassion and perspective, and to be honest, on some level, to bear the grief of communities. And that's a heavy burden to carry. So Rabbi Yoshi and I are going to perhaps open the door on our own souls a little bit and talk about how it is that we see ourselves as those who offer comfort, and how we answer some of the complex questions that are often posed to us. So Rabbi Yoshi, I'm going to actually start by asking you how you do it. What gives you the capacity to be present for community? And if, while you're answering, maybe talk about how God plays into your personal spirituality plays into your comfort that you offer.
Thank you, Ron. It's actually so beautiful to just be together. And that's part of my answer, is that at moments like this, I'm just so grateful that I'm part of a tradition that understands that we find strength in one another. We need a minyan to say certain prayers. You can't say Kaddish traditionally without coming together with 9 other people, and I think that's a reminder that helps give us strength, knowing that we're not alone. There's a passage from the book of Lamentations that I always go to in moments like this. Lamentations is one of the saddest and darkest books of the Hebrew Bible. It's attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, and it is set right after the destruction of the first temple, sometime in the 6th century before the Common Era. And there are just verse after verse after verse describing the destruction of Jerusalem, and it's just heartbreaking. It's this city, it's an elegy to a city that has just been ruined, with thousands and thousands of lives lost, and it describes the bitterness of seeing such destruction and bloodshed. And then in chapter 3, towards the end, something changes. In verse 20, it says, "Whenever I think of these things, I am bowed low." And it says, "Zot ashiv el libi," but this I remember, and I have hope. Because of this, I have hope. So what is the thing? Chastei Adonai ki lo tamnu. God's mercy is not finished forever. It's not done forever. And then there's a quote that finds its way into the morning prayers that I think is so interesting. The next verse, 23, it says, "Chadashim lebakarim rabba emunatecha." Every day is a new day. Great is your faithfulness. And we say those words, Rabba emunatecha, as part of the Modeh Ani prayer. So every morning when you get up, no matter how bad it is, you didn't sleep because you were thinking of those 19 children. Yesterday, I read the stories of each of the kids, and just seeing the pictures. I was talking to my wife, and she's like, I can't even look at the photos. It's too much. It keeps you up at night. It should. And you wake up in the morning, you think of those teachers who died trying to save their students, and you're broken. And then you remind yourself, Chadashim labakarim, it is a new day. Rabba emunatecha, at least we have that. And so even in the darkest moment, I think about a tradition of ours that saw in the darkness of the destruction of Jerusalem, don't give up hope entirely. Yes, mourn. Yes, cry. Yes, wail. Yes, scream in anger even, but don't give up hope.
That's a kind of faith,
Yeah.
right? Often we use the word, we think of some supernatural faith, but really you have to have faith to get up in the morning. You have to have faith to do so many things, to have children, to get married, to bother with education, to go out and earn a living, to believe that you'll be able to use what you've acquired each day. And that kind of faith, I think we turn to it often when we have to be present for those who are in pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Rabbi Stern, in terms of your own theology, and if you've ever had the chance to study Bible with Rabbi Stern, you know how passionate he is about the text, and I see some clapping happening, and it's a great way to get to know his theology just by studying with him. But in a moment like this, how does that theology play out? How does your belief in God and your understanding of God help you navigate something that's so tragic and senseless?
The beauty of the Bible, as I teach over and over again, and they're probably tired of hearing it, those who study with me, is that it was written by many people over many centuries. And so it captures the flavors and the theology and the perspectives of people as they've had to deal with different circumstances. And what we find is they ask many of the same questions that we ask, and their answers are often quite profound once we dig through the ancient language and really seek to understand what they say. Having said that, my own theology kind of moves beyond the Bible. And it really moves into the realm of both Mordechai Kaplan, Martin Buber, and a little bit of Spinoza. So I'll mix up three philosophers. And don't worry, I'm not going to go too deeply into their ideologies or theologies. Just to say that for me, God is about the experience we have as human beings. And the experiences we have that are the most meaningful in our lives, and the love that we feel between people. And when I hear about the good things that people do, and I got an email today from a friend of mine who owns a winery, who delivers wine to our house every couple of months.
By the way, that's one way you can get through these difficult moments. One more glass of wine, please.
And she didn't say, I'm going to bring you wine to make your day so easier. She said, this is not to sell you wine. We started a fund for the families in Uvalde, she said, and she has a huge mailing list, and she said, would you donate to the fund? This woman is a good Catholic. In fact, I officiated her husband's funeral in a church with a priest. And so we have different religious identities that we bring to this. And I got this email and opened it up today, and I wrote back to her, I said, well, amazing that you in Los Angeles have a business and a job, and you could be sending out your emails for so many other reasons, but you sent it out to help people you don't even know. That, to me, is God. When people do those kinds of things and they manifest the best that's in us, and they show that faith in their capacity to do good, knowing that we're not going to change the world. We may not even change the lives of that many people, but if we change one or two or three people and make it better, and it actually works, that's how we encounter and experience God. So that's where my sense of God comes in powerfully. So we come together and we pray and we recite the words of our tradition. You spoke about Lamentations. Are there other areas where Judaism and religion in general you think offers people comfort in times like this?
So many, and certainly worship is, for me, probably the most powerful, because it gives us the opportunity to allow our spirit to be moved. You know, there are certain times we have to approach things more clinically and intellectually. I sent something out to the congregation today that included a link to a recent piece that Nicholas Kristof wrote about concrete, tangible, sensible ways that we can save lives, not making it so such a thing that happened in Texas could never, ever happen again, but just making it less likely and making it so fewer lives would be lost. So sometimes we just need to use our brains and be very clinical about it. Prayer gives us an opportunity not to check the brain at the door, but to also make space for your soul and your spirit to be moved. And just to hear a beautiful melody, to hear David and Jeff and Josh moving us through a beautiful composition, to be moved by words of our prayer book, the last line of the Adon Alom prayer always gives me a sense of strength and hope. Biyado afkid ruchi. It's very anthropomorphic, and I only can understand it symbolically for that reason. But imagine that God has a hand, and God is holding you and comforting you, just like you would want. You know, there are moments you're just like, Mom, Dad, would you just, I'm 52 years old, you know, can you just hold me and just tell me everything's going to be okay? And biyado afkid ruchi, you know, whatever happens, somehow I feel like I'm going to be held, as it were, in God's arms. And that's what faith is, you know, and that's metaphysics. It's beyond things that we can necessarily understand or put our finger on. Let's just conclude with you sharing one of yours, Rabbi Stern. What's something that you go to in our tradition that can help you get through these moments?
As much as the internet is a dangerous place, it's also a beautiful place, and there's so much information that's good. You have to know what you're reading, you have to know what your source is, and you have to cast aside those that are not worth looking at. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs from England wrote beautiful Torah. He's no longer living. And he took the phrase that when Moses encountered the burning bush, Moses said, "Who are you?" And God said, "Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh." And Rabbi Sachs says that has to be translated as, "I will be what I will be." And then he goes on to say that is really at the core of what it means to be a Jew. It's that we have this vision of a future that's yet to be. We're not going towards something. We're not going towards the end of the world as Jews. We're not going towards a time. We don't talk a lot about life after death, because Judaism sees the world as always becoming. Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh, I will be what I will be. And what Rabbi Sachs says is that the Jewish story is filled with tragedies. How can the Jewish community stay intact? How can Jews as a community dare to hope, dare to build buildings, to have schools, to celebrate the moments in a family's life? How can we do it in a world that's so dark? And he says, Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh, because we believe that the world is yet becoming. And somehow or another, we believe that all of us are a part of that becoming. And if we do our part, even when we feel like we're getting knocked back on our heels, if we do our part, we're pushing forward just a little bit. And it may be a centimeter in 10 years. But that's the belief we hold on to. Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh. The world will be what it will be. And we're helping it get there.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Stern.